Hi, I'm Lori.
And I'm Kevin, and this is No Longer Ashamed.
We are survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
And we're here to share with you that if you're a survivor, you don't have to be alone.
Our logo is a salamander, and the reason is a fire salamander can survive a fire, and you have survived a fire.
We want to help you with your journey to healing and hope.
We are all survivors together, and we walk this journey together, and you are not alone.
By telling our stories, we are hoping that you will have the courage to share your stories as well and find your voice.
Because stories are so important, and for so long I know that I wouldn't tell my story, but when I finally shared my story, that's when I got my freedom.
And this is our journey and your journey to healing and hope. So come with us.
Can we just take a second and talk about Santa?
Let's give a shout out to Santa.
Our friend Mike
Our friend.
has gotten a certificate.
He's an official Santa.
He's an official Santa. And he is an amazing guy. And he's
Yes,
a
we
good
love-
Santa.
Yes, he is.
But one time we were talking about online dating, and I said that I had got, I don't know what you call it, a hit from
Yeah.
Santa. And he had a hat on it. I'm like, seriously?
Seriously,
On
really?
a dating site. So Mike, bless his heart, has had a lot of fun with that. So Mike, we love you, and we're so glad that you're part of our team and that you have shared your story. We look forward to a panel that's coming up where we're going to be talking about shame, and he is going to be on it.
Yeah. And we're volunteering right now to be your elves, Mike. So
Yes.
come Christmas time, we're lining up in our little booties. And
I
our
could
little
just see you with those
hats.
pointed ears.
Yeah. So
Yes, I love it. So today we are talking
for
about
this episode,
vulnerability.
Vulnerability.
And which is pretty amazing because we've talked about Brene Brown, and vulnerability looks very different, I believe, for men than women. So let's start with you, Kevin.
I think for men, vulnerability is one of the tougher subjects because it's one of the things we're taught not to be. We're taught not to be vulnerable, but the reason we're taught that is because, the whole male stereotype, you gotta be strong, you gotta, you
Don't
can't
cry.
don't cry, you can't show your feelings, you gotta tough everything out, which makes it hard later on and we've talked to a couple men recently about what it's been like to share, and it's always so hard to share their story because they're afraid of being vulnerable. They're afraid of opening up because it opens them up to being ashamed, and it opens them up to what people are going to think of them. And you have to be vulnerable to approach those feelings that you have about being a survivor, the feelings of shame and also of being helpless, being hurt, being...
The word that comes to me is not enough.
You don't understand. A lot of men don't, when they're being, when they were being abused, they don't understand what's happening to them. And so later on in their life, they don't want to talk about it because it brings up those feelings of vulnerability, of not having any control over what's happening to them, and also not knowing what to do about it,
and some judgment.
Yeah, for not fighting back, for not resisting, for not... Basically, it's like, why didn't you fight for yourself? Why didn't you stand your ground? Why didn't you, why did you let this happen to you? Well, those are kind of ridiculous arguments, but we face that in our lives. We face that feeling of we should have done something, and yet it wasn't our fault. We have to realize it wasn't our fault, that we didn't have a choice.
Right. And when you're dealing with it as an adult, it's hard to remember you were a child. So you think of yourself as an adult. And last week, or a couple of weeks ago, we had Luke on. And what I loved about him was he was 16. So the response he got was, you liked it? It was, right? He didn't get.
His first counselor basically said, it was his fault.
Right.
He should have done something about it. And yet he was drugged.
He was a child.
And he was held down.
Yes.
It wasn't his choice.
Exactly.
And yet people still were, because he was abused by a woman, they felt like, oh, well, why did you let that happen to you? And so vulnerability, though, it's hard to face vulnerability, but we need to be vulnerable. It's not a weakness. And that's something that a lot of men feel, is that if you're vulnerable, you're weak. No, if you're vulnerable, you're willing to take the risks.
You're brave.
To face those feelings.
Exactly.
And to be vulnerable is really a strong thing. You have to be strong to be vulnerable.
And again, that's what makes it hard to share your story. Mm-hmm. So for me, my abuse probably continued into my 20s. And also, I told Kevin before this episode, I've written a book, I've got podcasts. I have not really shared this with other people. But I feel like if I was to say this continued into my 20s, people would judge me. Mm-hmm. But when you are controlled and manipulated by someone, you do not know that you have the option to say no. Yeah. That's not in your vocabulary. Yeah. And when I think of people that finally are brave enough to share their journey, that what's incredible is, for one, other people hear it, like Luke's story. I believe people listened and went, oh my gosh, that happened to me, but I thought it was my fault.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, being vulnerable means giving up control. And so that is so hard for survivors, because that's one of the ways we cope with being a survivor, is we try to take control of our whole life. We try to manage everything, because we felt out of control when we were abused. So we respond by saying, okay, well, I'm going to take complete control over my life, and this will never happen again.
Right. It's an illusion.
Yeah. But in order to be vulnerable, you have to give up that control. You have to let go of that. But that's how you grow. That's how you grow in healing, is by letting go of the control, opening up to your feelings. For men, this is the hard part, approaching your feelings, letting them out. And it doesn't happen all at once. You have to approach this a little bit, try it a little bit at a time.
Say more about that. Like, what was that like for you? It wasn't like one day you recognized it and you did the work. So what does the baby steps look like?
It was a huge step just to approach it at first, and then to go to therapy and find someone I trusted that I could talk about, and then realized that I needed more help, and I went to group therapy. And that was I think that, for men, that's a tough one, especially men who are abused by men, to be in a group of men,
right,
and talk about being abused. But we all had to be vulnerable with each other. And so there was this we just had to start out a little bit at a time until we could trust each other enough to,
baby steps,
to share what we were feeling, share what happened to us, share how that was affecting us. And those things all helped us to grow in healing and also in maturity, because partly, I think when you're abused at a young age, you're emotionally immature. You don't grow in maturity emotionally. And so you learn that process by being vulnerable and being emotional with other people and sharing what's going on with other people. And that process of being vulnerable also helps you to grow emotionally.
Which feels so counterintuitive, right? And the thing that I've noticed in the interviews we've done is that people have not wanted to share. Mm-hmm. And then when they do, that's when the doors open. And it feels like this thing, I think of my boys, and they were raised by me, but their dad was gay. They have no problem in wearing a pink shirt, right? They're not going to be like that. But on the other hand, it's like they are a generation that says, my dad's gay. What, you got a problem with that?
Yeah.
And I think that there's also this area of you got a problem with that. And for me, I haven't shared this. From my perspective, I didn't share it in my book. I haven't shared it except on this podcast. But that being vulnerable, it feels very scary because I think we want to come across as we figured it out.
Yeah.
We've got it together, and just follow me and I'll walk you through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even doing this podcast is a vulnerable thing for, I know both of us. For me, it's part of it is being willing to share with other people, guys I work with, and, people I know that I'm doing a podcast. And it's about being a survivor. And that isn't always easy, but it's important. And I think it's also helping me grow emotionally as far as I'm okay with that. I'm okay with people having that kind of reaction, that what?
Right.
And I'm like, well, yeah, it happened to me. It's what I'm dealing with, but I'm doing this podcast because I want to reach out to others and help them.
And when you think about the statistics, which is on our webpage, how many, like 1 in 3 boys?
I don't know. They don't know for sure, but yeah.
Go look at our webpage. NoLongerAshamed.org.
They estimate 1 in 6, 1 in 5, but that's, a low estimate because it's so underreported.
Exactly.
And so the likelihood that someone who's a survivor is pretty high, generally.
That's what I loved about Avrame, is he was never going to tell anybody. If you can go back and listen, I think it was 2 ago. He was never going to tell anybody, and then he reported. And I love the freedom that he has. I love I don't want to say stability. What would you say is the word? The confidence?
Yeah, the confidence.
I walked away from that interview a different person.
Yeah, and he's become an advocate now.
Yes.
And which is amazing considering his whole life he tried to just
hide it,
suppress it, bottle it up, which most of us do.
Right. I'm never telling anybody.
Yeah. And now he's an advocate and he's amazing, doing amazing work.
And then we see it, like for me, I remember this woman telling her mom she had been abused by somebody that I had actually known. I'd actually dated. How weird is that? And her mom believed her. And I remember thinking, isn't that incredible? The difference in your recovery when somebody believes you versus not being believed.
Yeah. And I think that holds true for several people that we've talked to. And even for Hampton, who, he wasn't sexually abused. He was abused by his wife. It was spousal abuse, but he had to fight so hard to get someone to get through the court system so that he can get control of his children, so he can get his children out of the hands of the person that was abusing him and his kids.
Right. And people won't believe that. They want to say, oh my gosh, here's a black man. He must be abusing his family. And I love that he walked through the process. And I love that we were able to listen to him and hear him. I was just thinking about him today, how far he's come, and that when we're willing to be vulnerable, which is not easy, vulnerability is very scary. And, when we listen to Brene Brown, Brene with that little dash above it, she says, we don't want to be vulnerable to everybody, right? No. We want to be vulnerable to the people that it will make a difference. And it is hard. It takes courage. I think about Rachel Platten. I heard the best interview. She has the song, I Want to See You Be Brave. You know that song. And I love the interview and how she came to that. It's with Kathy Heller. Don't keep your day job. If you can listen to that. But also just thinking about how vulnerability and being brave enough to tell our story, being brave enough to not be worried about what people will think, because it does not matter.
Well, and it is important, though, who we choose to be vulnerable around, especially at first, when you are really vulnerable.
Until you get a hold on it, and then it doesn't matter, right?
Well, until you, realize that we are not defined by what happened to us, but at first it feels like we are.
Isn't
And
that
so,
beautiful, Kevin?
yeah,
That we are not defined
we
by
don't
that.
have to be defined by this. So how do you approach being vulnerable? Well, you have to try it a little bit at a time. And
Yeah.
especially for men, who do you do it with? Well,
Right.
you do it with your spouse. That's kind of hard because
Yeah.
with your spouse, you don't want to appear vulnerable because you're supposed to be the strong one in the family. Do you do it with your family members? Well, that depends if what their relationship is. You know, there's so many tough.
My daughter-in-law, who is a health coach, says, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
So you find the person you can be vulnerable with,
Right.
safely, and try it a little bit at a time, and explore what it's like to actually, for men, have feelings and let go of that control a little bit at a time.
And feelings are hard. I'm a recovery coach, as I've said before, and it's so amazing when people get clean and sober for a certain amount of time and they're like, I'm feeling, and I'm like, good, and they're like, no,
I'm
not good.
I don't like these feeling things.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet it's such an opportunity. When I look at, I look at gratitude. That's one thing that the recovery world embraces. First thing is gratitude. And when I look at gratitude, that is what gets us through.
Yeah.
Whether we are believe, not believe, when we can look at gratitude and separate ourselves from the abuse, that we are not anything but beautiful in God's eyes.
Yeah.
And so often there's this idea that if we don't accept ourselves, there's some sort of weird humility. But when we look in the mirror and we say, I am enough, I am a creation of God, that can begin to change our brain, which changes our life.
Yeah. And it seems difficult when you're first going through this to be grateful.
Yes, I know.
And to be thankful. But I think once we find out we actually do have a purpose, that there's a reason we did survive, and that we weren't abused for a purpose. That happened because somebody
had a free will.
Yeah, and, was messed up.
Yeah.
But we can do something about it. We can change our lives and change others' lives.
Right. Thank
for
you
the better.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kevin, because I think people who are naive, they don't get it. And they say, oh, it happened for a reason. They're just mimicking words that they've heard. And when we are dealing with our stuff, if we latch on to those beliefs, it's really hard to find a God that is a loving God, because what loving God allows abuse? Well, a loving God who gives us free will. So we may become the victim of someone, but we don't stay the victim. And I think that is the glory. That we can choose. It is a choice, and we can choose not to be a victim. And I have, as a coach, I have watched people who want to be a victim. They want to be hurt. They want to be pitied. And I'm not here to say that's not okay. We all have the path we walk, but God has a purpose. And if you are walking and you go, I don't know God's purpose, part of that might be His purpose is so high and so far up that if you knew it right now, you would say, absolutely not. Right?
No way.
And that's what I love about God, is He takes these baby steps, but He always has a purpose for us. And if He had a purpose for us when we were 4 and we went through abuse and then we had to deal with it, whatever, how long it took, is that He still has a purpose, and His purpose is that He will be glorified. And I look at your story, and God is glorified in your story.
Yeah, He's persistent.
Right.
He's always persistent, and He wants to have us fulfill our purpose in our lives, and He wants to be there to help us fulfill our purpose. But we have to look to that purpose, and I think the hard thing about vulnerability is it feels like a weakness. It feels like we're not, because as survivors, we want to be strong. We want to, a lot of men react to being a survivor.
I see, like Thor.
They put up this wall of defense of, they bulk up, they bodybuild or go into martial arts. But being vulnerable is also allowing yourself to reach those places that were hurt so you can heal them. You have to open up those places so you can heal them. And that's scary, but that's also why it's so brave, why it's so, it's actually a lot braver to be vulnerable than to try and hide it.
I was talking with my daughter-in-law this morning. We do a podcast, and she said that her brother had given her a call. Now, this is a brother that's actually married into the family, so I guess he would be a stepbrother. And I know their whole family. I've known her since she was a little girl, and she said it was such an interesting conversation because her brother said, I don't want to live in hate anymore. And when I look at that child, so I was an adult watching the family situation. He was the youngest, almost the youngest of that family. And I thought, how could he be anything other than what he is? But he did get into recovery. And he said, I don't want to live with hate. And when my daughter-in-law told me that, it touched my heart, because when people say, when they blame, that's okay because they've been victimized. But when they come from a place of, I don't want to live in hate, I want to live in forgiveness, that is such a beautiful place, because that's where we get our freedom. Yeah. So often we think forgiveness means letting the perpetrator off the hook. That is not what forgiveness is. I have forgiven both of my parents. They will never have a relationship with my children or my grandchildren. Does that mean I didn't forgive? No, I have forgiven. I have absolutely forgiven. But we still, do you hear that? We are still responsible adults. And speaking the truth is so hard. But, I listen to Brene Brown all the time, and she says our mind can change our brain. And this is so true. And when we continue in our older years to recognize what abuse is and forgive and walk forward in God's glory, all God wants for us is for us to glorify Him in every way. And if that is my purpose, then I gladly accept. In spite of all that happened. And I think I've said this before. I have never said, I wish that didn't happen. Because in my mind, you can wish that all you want, but it still happens. It's not
going to change things.
But that, who will I be in spite of that, right? And when I think of other people, can I be an example of forgiveness? Because that is the only way. That is, for me, that is the Alice in Wonderland. That is the door. Forgiveness is where we walk through to whatever is next. And when we resist that, it only hurts our heart.
Yeah, when we're holding on to it.
Right? So vulnerability.
How to be vulnerable and survive it. It almost feels like it makes us weaker. It makes us, we're scared of being vulnerable, but you will become stronger by being vulnerable, by approaching those.
Exactly. And so as a coach, one of my big things is reframing. So when you say vulnerable, we feel like we're weak. Actually, when we reframe it and we look at it, vulnerability is strength. It's a mindset.
It basically strengthens us by you're approaching what you're afraid of, and you're overcoming what you're afraid of. And that is why it's so hard. But as you start doing it a little bit at a time and start learning how to do it a little bit more at a time, you get stronger and stronger, and then you're not afraid of being vulnerable. And vulnerability doesn't go away. It's part of everyone's lives. I mean, everyone is vulnerable in certain ways, but when you're not afraid of being vulnerable, then you're not going to hide from it.
I always say what we resist persists. So when we embrace what happened and we say, this happened, this is who I am, and then there's this element of bring it on. I'm not going to be a victim. And the thing that I think all my years I didn't really recognize, I knew I did what was right. I forgave, and I seriously forgave. When my father passed away, I had forgiven. I think that there was part of me that was like trying to understand this. And what I believe is that when we look at our purpose for our life, so I remember growing up, God has a purpose for your life. Yeah, the purpose is is that we accept him.
Yeah.
But seriously, as we grow, our purpose is to glorify him,
Yeah.
whatever. And so for me, like I have a podcast, a coaching podcast. I have several coaching podcasts, but this podcast, this isn't something I share on my radio, on the air, but that if my life and what I've walked through can help anybody, then it's worth it. I don't know if worth it, but I don't go back and say, I wish that never happened. It happened. It was my life and I'm moving on and I love my life.
Yeah. I think it's worth risking vulnerability to do this. That's the way I look at it. I'm being very vulnerable to be on air and talk about this and then
I know.
Share it with others and talk to them and the people that we interview, they're very vulnerable. Some of them haven't shared it with, they've shared it with very few people. But if it helps someone else, it is worth it to take that risk of being vulnerable. And by being vulnerable, you learn that it's not as scary as you think it is at first. You really realize that you can, you actually grow by being vulnerable. You grow emotionally, you grow spiritually. And so it's like working out in a way. You're building your emotional muscles.
Yeah. I don't remember if we talked about this before or if we have already talked about it on the podcast, but the fact that when we accept Christ as our Savior, there is sort of this thing like everything will be fine. But like I coach a lot of people in recovery and they are walking through recovery. They're having to face their court. They're having to face what they have neglected. They're having to get a credit score. Right. And so they're walking through. And so when we are vulnerable, when we tell our story, I think of Luke, it was really his first time. And Jamie, it was really her first time. But when they are telling their story, there is this, this sounds like crazy, but there's this magic. And I think with Luke, both you and I felt this. We felt this parental protection over him. Yeah. And the fact that he was willing to share a story that was difficult. And I have a friend that teaches counseling, and she says the hardest thing is living in an unresolved story. So sometimes we don't get the perpetrator. The perpetrator doesn't go to prison. There's an unresolvedness about it, but how will we be in spite of that?
Yeah. And when we interviewed Luke, also, by the end of the interview, you can see this weight had lifted off him. And he was in this place of peace. Right. Like, you can tell there was this resolve about him that he was going to do this to help others. And he really wanted his story out there if it would help someone else.
He felt heard. He felt believed. And all he wanted to do was volunteer somewhere.
Yeah, to help.
Somehow.
And that's why he's writing his book. That's, he wants to make a difference for someone else. And you can't do that if you're not vulnerable. Right. If you're not willing to open up that place that we're all afraid of. And I love this story when Remy was talking about the prosecutor who was talking to the jury, and he said, we all have that secret in our lives that we don't want to share with anyone.
That was so beautiful.
We all have that secret, and yet you wonder why it takes so long for a survivor to tell their story. We all have these secrets that if we had a choice, we would never share, because by sharing it makes us so vulnerable.
Right.
So when we open up and share our stories, we grow. We grow emotionally, we grow in our healing. We are able to open up that part of our lives that we have been trying to hide. But by opening up, we open up a whole different, part of ourselves to others that can help them out.
Kevin, when you said, I wanted you to do a podcast. I didn't know what you would do it on. You chose this. But as we listen to different stories of Remy, touched my heart so much because he was on fire. Luke touched my heart because it was his first time telling the story, and he wanted to change lives. He wanted to help. Yeah. And I think what is so amazing is that we have been going through this time of COVID where some people are with family all the time and they want to be alone. Some people are alone and they want to be with family. But that the biggest thing is that when we can be honest about abuse, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's sexual abuse, is that it is so vulnerable and it is so scary. But when we can speak the words, the more we do it, the more we tell our story, the more empowerment we get, the more, I don't know, what would you say? I mean, you have told your story. It's been years now, and you've been telling your story over and over, and every time there's like this new element of vulnerability, right?
I think one of the things I see is it makes the giant step that others have to take to tell their story a little bit smaller. We're making it, that's my whole intention, is to make it a little bit easier for the next person.
It feels like closing the gap is what you're saying. Is that?
So for the person who's been hiding it, afraid to tell, doesn't want to be vulnerable, if it allows them to be just a little bit vulnerable and open up and tell their story, if it makes it a little bit easier for them, that is how I see, by being vulnerable over and over again, maybe they'll go, well, he survived talking about it. It didn't wreck his life. He's still doing work. He's still, everything, seems to be going good for him. Maybe it's not so bad after all to tell your story.
It's so important to tell our story. And as a coach, my thing is I teach podcasting, publishing, and coaching. And the reason, so many people say that's too much, but the reason is our story matters. If it matters to one person, then it's worth it.
It is. Yeah.
Right? And I know that so I share a lot of my story about being a single mom, about starting a career later in life. But when I have the opportunity of sharing my story of abuse to someone who has struggled, it makes a difference because they look at where I am now and they go, oh my gosh, she has a life. And I love my life. I've been saying this for years. I love my life. I work in radio. I'm on the #1 station in the nation. I'm teaching coaching. I just sent Kevin the latest podcast from a student who published it.
We just listened to it tonight.
Yeah. So I love my life. Do I wish all this stuff hadn't happened? I don't know, because I love who I am today. And if it's because of all of that, then this journey is worth it.
Yeah, and I just hope I can be that person that can help someone else to find a way to risk being vulnerable.
Right.
And it means praying to God. I need to talk about this, but I don't know how.
Right.
If it means finding the person if it means, like with Luke, just writing it down.
Yeah.
Just doing the journal, writing it down, getting it out, and then finding a way to talk about it.
And actually, in writing it down, realizing, oh my goodness, I was 16, I was 14, I was abused. Because there is just so many things that come against us. And I know for me, I did not share my story, but I'll tell you, the minute I realized I had a story is we had this amazing receptionist at schools. The secretary is always amazing, right? You go in, she's the one who loves you, who excuses you. And I asked her, I said, what is this word? And it was incest. Yeah. And she said, oh, that's when a family member has sex with a family member. And I remember putting on my best smile because that's what I did. And I went, oh. And I walked away going, holy crap. But I didn't have support at that time. This was at a time where this was not spoken about. And so I remember like recognizing it. And we had neighbors down the road. They were the bakers and they were the school counselor. And he was the counselor. I don't know what her job was, but I remember, even though we didn't tell them, there was this safety in them. They went to they worked at our school, but they lived right down the road from us. and we never told our story, but there was something about them that made us feel safe. And we did not tell our story till way later in life, till after I had kids. It was too dangerous. It was too scary. And then, like I told the Vreme, we went to the police. Guess what? There was a 7-year, what do you call it?
Statute of
limitations.
Which we need to change.
Exactly.
In this country.
And there are people working on that. But I remember going in a small town, going to somebody that's the sheriff that you know and telling them that's vulnerability. And then for them to say, yeah, I'm sorry that happened to you, but there's nothing we can do. And when I'm looking at the people who abuse me are going to Christian camps, they're going to places where they have access to children. Yeah. And what is my responsibility?
But the police won't do anything because
they can't, because of the laws. And I called every single camp. And I will tell you, when it comes to narcissists, a church, an organization will more often than not choose the abuser, the narcissist. Yes. I don't know what that's about, and I hope that I can have an impact on that. But currently, and I have a situation right now with somebody who is a leader in our community, hurting people who are vulnerable. And the church the church and the licensing agency has all sided with her, and there's only so much I can do.
Yeah, when it's your word against them,
exactly.
And they're so convincing.
Right. They know how to spin it.
They know how to do.
And we will have a conversation about red flags and abusers. But here's the thing, is most abusers know how. They're charming. They know how to spin a story and make you look like you're the problem when you are the victim. And I would encourage anyone going through that to reach out to somebody like us who will hear you and believe you. Even though the story is being spun against you, there are people that will believe you, that will stand behind you. And I think about Luke, really, we were the first one he told the story to. I think about Jamie. I was the first one. Kevin, you were the second one, besides her sponsor. It's like, let's tell our story. And even though it's hard, even though you feel so vulnerable, but you know what? We are no longer the victim, because we are victors in Jesus Christ. We are victorious no matter what, because we have a choice.
And, they know how to work the story, because they have to keep it a secret. They have to basically convince everyone that they're the good guys, because otherwise, they can't keep doing that. So let's break the chains of vulnerability.
Let's break the cycle.
Break the cycle. Be vulnerable, but by being vulnerable, you will be stronger.
And if you have been a victim, you will be more hypervigilant about your children. And I remember your wife just telling us a story about somebody who was probably a perpetrator was reaching out to a young boy, and the parents were like, oh, isn't that cool? He's a youth leader. But your wife saw it differently.
Yeah, we both were like,
no,
that doesn't sound like a good idea.
Right. And the wisdom and the courage of you to be able to say that. And it's not about accusing somebody. It's easy to look at someone and accuse. That's what this is not about.
No.
What it's about is intuition. I feel, I trust, I know. And you know what? If we're wrong, so what? Right? Because if we're right, we have protected a child.
Yeah, that's the main point. The possibility that we were wrong is, we don't know, but don't want to take the risk. It was just that the situation sounded way too risky, and we were going, no, I don't think that's worth it.
And if we're going to err, let's err on that side.
Yeah, let's err on the safety of the kids.
Because we're all they have. And
someone has to be looking out for them.
Right. So my kids were raised with a mom who had been abused and was very suspicious, hyper vigilant. And so because of that, my kids, they are still hyper vigilant. They, I only have one child with kids, but because they're foster kids, most of them, she is hypervigilant. Yeah. She is paying attention. But if I gave her any gift, was that, I watched her. I remember, state fairs. Did you ever go to state fairs?
Oh, yeah.
State fair, and we went every year because we rode horses and she rode horses. State fairs were excruciating. Yeah. I was so hypervigilant, and their dad did not understand. Even though he had his issues, he didn't understand where I was coming from. And it was exhausting. So exhausting. But you know what? Even though maybe I was over the top, I protected my children.
So that's it for today.
We are going to have a prayer time if you want to stick with us. If not, we believe in you.
We want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories.
If you like this podcast, please rate and review, because that's how other people can find us. And we really want to spread this message.
Father, I thank you for all your blessings, especially for being there when we are vulnerable and wanting us to be vulnerable with you, wanting us to share our weaknesses, our pain. I pray that anyone who's listening would find an outlet to pray to you with their fears, with their vulnerability, and that you would answer their prayers, Lord, that you would bless them with your presence in their lives and your grace in their lives and your blessings in their lives and with your healing, Lord. And I just pray that they would find that being vulnerable is a good thing. It is a healing thing, that it helps you to become stronger. It helps you to be a blessing to others. And Lord, I just pray that in their vulnerability, they would find their strength, Lord. They would find that they would grow by being vulnerable and approaching those things that scare them and finding out that they don't have to be afraid, that we can talk about their feelings and their issues and what scares them, and that they would grow through that, especially in your presence. In your name I pray.
And Father, I'm so grateful. I know it sounds so crazy, but I am so grateful for my life, for what I walked through. And Lord, you have revealed to me Edith Eger, who was an Auschwitz survivor. And Lord, how she tells the story of, number one, it's a choice. And number two, it's the gift. And that when we can use whatever has happened, we can use however we were victimized to your glory, Father, that we know we have a free will, and our free will is that we can choose to make this something to glorify you, or we can choose to remain a victim. And Father, I am so grateful that for whatever reason early in my life, you showed me about forgiveness. You taught me about forgiveness. And Lord, that has served me so well in so many ways. And I don't know that I can say I'm grateful for my abuse, but I am grateful for my life. I'm grateful for where I am right now. I am so grateful that you can be glorified through my life, through the people that I reach out to, through the people I help, and through who I am, Lord, that I am choosing love in a world right now that feels so full of hate. Lord, I choose love. I choose not to judge. And when I do, I feel like you show me that is judgment, and my job is to glorify you. My job is humility, to step down, to bow down, and to ask your forgiveness. My job is to believe that you are the Savior for whatever horrendous things. I think of Edith Eger and Auschwitz. Can we think of anything worse? And yet, she made a choice to serve you. She made a choice to forgive. And I'm so grateful for people that share their story, that step out to glorify you. And I know our job here on earth, we have a purpose. Whatever it is, the purpose is that you will be glorified. And Father, I pray that my life will glorify you. In your Son's holy name, amen.